Let's talk dictators, people, the ones who left an indelible mark on history. Specifically, two of the 20th century's worst, Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. Their names are synonymous with tyranny and oppression. These guys weren't just your average bullies. They were the poster boys for fascism, embodying its darkest principles. Imagine a world where one dude calls all the shots, crushing anyone who disagrees. No room for dissent, no space for freedom. That's fascism in a nutshell. A system where power is concentrated in the hands of a single leader. Mussolini, as Mussolini, I formed the National Fascist Party in Italy back in 1921. My vision was to revive the Roman Empire's glory. I was all about restoring Italy to its supposed former glory, even if it meant silencing anyone who stood in my way. No opposition was tolerated. Then there's Hitler, the Führer with a creepy moustache and even creepier ideas. His ambitions were even more terrifying. He took inspiration from Mussolini, modeling his Nazi party after the Italian fascists. He saw Mussolini's success and wanted to replicate it. Hitler believed in the supremacy of the Aryan race and wanted to create a German empire that would last 1,000 years. Spoiler alert, it didn't. His vision led to unprecedented destruction. Both men were masters of manipulation, using propaganda and violence to seize power. They controlled the narrative and instilled fear. They promised their people strength and stability, but delivered tyranny and terror. Their reigns left scars that the world still remembers. So, how did these guys go from nobodies to dictators? It's a fascinating and chilling story. It's a tale as old as time exploit fear and anger. When people are scared and angry, they become vulnerable to manipulation. After World War I, both Italy and Germany were in shambles. Economies were devastated, and political systems were in chaos. People were desperate for a solution, for someone to blame. They wanted strong leaders who promised to restore their nation's former glory. Enter Mussolini and Hitler, stage right. Both men saw an opportunity to seize power. Mussolini, as Mussolini, Italy was reeling from economic turmoil and political instability. The country was on the brink of collapse. I played on people's fears, promising to restore order and revive the economy. I knew exactly what they wanted to hear. My black shirts, a paramilitary group, intimidated opponents and silenced dissent. They were my enforcers. In 1922, I marched on Rome, forcing the king to appoint me prime minister. It was a bold move that paid off. And just like that, Italy was under my thumb. I had achieved absolute power. Hitler's rise was a bit slower. He was more methodical in his approach. He saw an opportunity in Germany's post-war humiliation and economic depression. The country was ripe for radical change. He tapped into resentment over the Treaty of Versailles and blamed Jews and other minorities for Germany's problems. This scapegoating was central to his strategy. Hitler as Hitler. My Nazi party, with its message of hate and national revival, gained traction. We promised to make Germany great again. By 1933, I had maneuvered my way into becoming Chancellor of Germany. It was a position of immense power. Both men consolidated their power ruthlessly. They knew that to maintain control, they had to eliminate any threats. They abolished opposition parties, silenced the press, and created police states where dissent was met with swift and brutal punishment. Their regimes were built on fear and oppression. Mussolini and Hitler might have led different countries, but they were reading from the same playbook. Both understood the power of propaganda. They controlled the media, churning out messages that glorified their regimes and demonized their enemies. Think massive rallies, catchy slogans, and posters plastered everywhere. They knew a thing or two about brainwashing. Mussolini, as Mussolini, violence was another shared tactic. In Italy, we had the Oviara, our secret police force to crush dissent and eliminate opposition. Hitler as Hitler. And in Germany, we had the Gestapo. We were the definition of terrifying, spying on citizens and making people disappear. Both dictators also embraced nationalism and militarism. They glorified war as a way to achieve national greatness and expand their empires. They pumped up their armies, preparing for conflict and dragging their countries, and eventually the world, into a devastating war. Section 4. Different shades of evil contrasting leadership styles. While both Mussolini and Hitler were cut from the same fascist cloth, they had their differences, which were significant and shaped their respective regimes.
Mussolini was more of a classic dictator, all about power and control, focusing on the grandeur of his persona. He was vain, flamboyant, and loved being the center of attention, often staging grandiose public appearances. Think of him as the narcissistic frontman of the fascist band, always seeking the limelight and adoration of the masses.
Hitler, on the other hand, was more ideological, driven by his twisted vision of racial purity and a 1,000-year Reich, which he believed was his destiny to create. He was a master manipulator, playing on people's fears and prejudices, using propaganda to spread his toxic ideology. He was also incredibly ruthless, willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to achieve his goals, showing no mercy to those who stood in his way.
Their approaches to war also differed. Mussolini saw war as a way to assert Italian dominance, but he was more cautious and less ideologically driven than Hitler, often hesitating to fully commit. Hitler, on the other hand, was all in on war, convinced it was the only way to achieve his grand vision of a dominant Aryan race and a vast empire. Section 5. Mussolini's toxic legacy. Inspiring a generation of hate. Mussolini might have been a wannabe Caesar, but his influence on other fascist leaders, including Hitler, was very real.
He was the OG fascist, the one who showed the world that a dictator could seize power and crush opposition. He provided a blueprint for aspiring tyrants, including Hitler.
Hitler admired Mussolini's rise to power and adopted many of his tactics. He saw in Mussolini a model for how to exploit nationalistic sentiment, build a mass movement, and establish a totalitarian state. Hitler even copied Mussolini's style, rocking the military uniform and perfecting the dramatic balcony speech.
Mussolini's brand of fascism, with its emphasis on nationalism, militarism, and authoritarianism, resonated with other far-right movements across Europe.
From Franco's Spain to Salazar's Portugal, fascist regimes sprung up, inspired by the Italian model.
Section 6. Beyond the Surface. Studying Fascism in a New Light. Today, studying fascism isn't just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding how these regimes came to power, how they manipulated their people, and how they justified their brutality. It's about recognizing the warning signs and preventing history from repeating itself.
Scholars are digging deeper, looking beyond the surface to understand the psychological and sociological factors that allowed fascism to flourish. They're examining the role of propaganda, the appeal of charismatic leaders, and the dangers of unchecked nationalism.
Section 7. A Legacy of Ruin. The lasting impact of fascism. Mussolini and Hitler's fascist regimes left a trail of devastation in their wake. Millions died in their senseless wars, victims of their genocidal policies and casualties of their brutal regimes. They plunged the world into darkness, leaving scars that still linger today. The legacy of fascism is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, blind nationalism, and intolerance. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. By studying the past, by understanding how these regimes came to power, we can work to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. We have a responsibility to learn from history, to fight against injustice, and to stand up for what is right.